Hello, my name is Douglas Oates, and today we are going to be walking you through a demo of broad spectrum data access governance, which focuses on managing risk associated with unstructured data. As you can see this in the screen here, this is a four-step process. In step one, Patrick Johnson is going to show you how we can analyze the content in a Windows file share. And in this demo, we will be focusing specifically on identifying sensitive financial data. Then I'm going to demo how we can do an analysis of who has access to this sensitive data and how they are gaining this access, and then provide the capability to protect this data and lock it down so only approved users have access. And finally, Richard Cabana is going to show you how you can provide business level managers the ability to do an access review of the data they are responsible for, which for this demo is the financial data. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Patrick, who is going to walk you through a little more detail on the demo today, and then get started with step one, which is analyzing the content.
The objective of the demo is we need to find out who has access to certain sensitive data that's got credit card details in it, right? So I'm a data security analyst, and I'm the first step of this whole process. I need to go out and scan that particular department file share. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and scan all departments, but I'm really focused in on this finance file share. And I'm going to look for sensitive data using core data discovery and risk insights. Obviously, I'm targeting to look for credit card details, but I'm going to set up for all U.S. Consumer Privacy Act, and I'm going to identify certain stuff by tag eventually, and then do something with it. While I'm at it, I could also talk to things like our ability to clean up the data set and maybe move certain things that we found that were sensitive to a controlled repository, like obviously OpenText Content Manager, or content management to be correct, or document them for that matter. But the true objective here is, again, that I find sensitive data that's got credit card details in it in this finance share so that I can report on who has access to it. So from my end, my mission really stops as soon as I found it and I say, all right, DAG, tell me who has access to it. And I have a custom action that's going to call out to basically report on permissions. At that point, it gets handed over to Doug, who's going to come in with the DAG suite and review, with File Reporter, basically a consolidated view of the risk that I've identified in the content, as well as the access permissions or the exposure that File Reporter has gathered for each of the items, right? So all the access controls, exactly how users got rights to certain directories, and then ultimately he can drive a protection call using DAG protect or file dynamics to apply an appropriate policy to remediate, right? It could be a fencing policy or something else. And Doug can clearly talk to that in much more detail in his part of the demo. And then the last part is the periodic reviews, the attestation reviews, right? So that's where after Doug's finished, it'll go to Richard, and he'll just be walking through the constant reviews that IG does for attestation. I'm coming in as the data security officer, and my objective is to scan the finance department's file share to find all data that's got credit card details in it so that I can then pass it off as a custom action to the DAG components for reporting on its permissions and access controls. So CDDRI, or Core Data Discovery and Risk Insights, is broken up into three areas. Connect, where we establish what we're going to talk to, what we're going to scan, that is, and what we're going to look for, grammars and patterns. Analyze is ultimately where we're going to see the results of that scan, and then lastly, manage is where we go in and define rules to call on actions to do either reports, like we're talking about for permission reporting, or perhaps other types of actions, like perhaps to move data to a different location for a secure content management type approach, or to do data cleanup, like for redundant, obsolete, and trivial type task. So again, as my objective, I need to come into connect first, and I need to establish what data set I'm going to connect to scan. And so if we come over to the left side, I'm picking out the manage data sets area here, and I'm ultimately defining a file share path that I want to go out and scan. So this is my file share path, but I'm really looking at just the finance department. So I can actually create sub data sets or data sets underneath a data source that I want to go scan. In this case, if I click on finance, what I'm really looking to scan on this particular path is defined underneath the grammar sets. I want to look for certain specific types of grammars and patterns. Specifically, I'm looking for credit card numbers. Now, the way this is set up, though, is we actually allow you to group different kinds of grammars and patterns into grammar sets, typically derived by regulatory requirements. So perhaps instead of U.S. Consumer Privacy Act, I was looking for content that has any kind of GDPR type data, and I can add that grammar set in, and we can see that the different grammars that are associated and their regions are selected. I can also include multiple grammar sets, right? So I could have back in there the U.S. Consumer Privacy Act, and so I can see, the ability for me to scan and really pick out on sensitive data that meets the requirements of my type of scan. So again, in my scenario, I'm looking for U.S. consumer privacy data, and specifically, I really want to find anything that has credit card numbers. So if I come back though, I scan looking for that kind of data is just going to tell me I found those entities, those values on certain files based on those grammar definitions. Really what I want to do is I want to be able to see what was risky out of that. And that gets us to our tags where we get to classify the data. So again, we're looking for credit card details. So whenever I find a file that has a grammar hit for a credit card number, I want to apply a tag associated to it. And we can see here a tag called credit card details. And this is done by setting up a rule or criteria to say anytime I find a file that has a credit card number grammar in it, associate this tag. This tag, if we go back to the general tab, is grouped as part of the financial data. So this is really its classification. So the nice thing here is I can say, show me all financial data, and then specifically say, just show me credit card details as a tag. The last thing though is a tag also needs to be able to assign the sensitivity or the risk associated to that file. And that's what a weighted label does. So in this case, when we find something that's got credit card details, we want it to be considered highly sensitive. A weighted label has a score ranking associated to it between 0 and 1,000, or 10,000, I should say, and also has a color coding that is visually represented when we go to the dashboards. Highly sensitive, I want it to be dark red. Something that's maybe not as sensitive, I want it to be green or yellow, things like that. So if we take a look back here on the list of all of our reporting groups and tags, you can see here that I have, for instance, a reporting group for financial data, but then I have several different tags in here for for different kinds of content that was identified. And again, not every tag that's part of this reporting group is highly sensitive. Sort codes, for instance, is just partially sensitive. If a document's found with sort codes, it's going to have a lesser risk associated to it. So from here, I've already set up my scan. I've defined my tags. I've scanned that file share. The next component of this is to go and view the results. So if I come back to the main dashboard, we can see I'm now moving on to the Analyze step. So inside of Analyze, again, I'm the data security officer and I'm looking for sensitive data, specifically credit card data within the finance department. I want to look at unstructured data and I have a dashboard specifically targeted to unstructured data. And in this dashboard, before I go into the details of it, I want to filter this down to just specific file shares. I could select just the finance file share or data set. I'm going to actually, in this case, pick the all departments, which includes the finance department, just to show a little bit more data within the repository. So now I'm getting a very specific view of everything within that file share and what was considered sensitive. First off, I get to see when it was scanned, and ultimately how much was scanned in and how much of that was sensitive, in this trend dashboard here that we're seeing. But the more important part for me here is the dashboards below, where I get to see the kind of content that was picked up on. So for instance, if I click more here, we can see under the reporting groups that we found some content that has financial data, of which not all of it is as sensitive as other stuff within that same reporting group. Again, a reporting group has multiple tags. So this is just one way for us to be able to quickly see where we have risky data within a specific repository or a collection of repositories. From here, I could also go and look at just all highly sensitive data if I wanted to, as opposed to sensitive data specific to a reporting group. Or if I wanted to, I could come down here and say, you know what, my objective was just to find everything that had a credit card number. And so I can look at it just solely by its grammar as opposed to by its tag or its risk or its reporting group, its classification, that is. But in my case, I'm really kind of curious what all is highly sensitive in financial data. And this now gets me to the list of documents across those file shares where it's found something that's highly sensitive in the financial data reporting group. Now, because of my objective, let me filter this down. I'm only going to look for content that has credit card details, because not everything that's financial has credit card details. And actually, let me even further focus this down to just content that has that's part of the finance department. And now I've gotten down to 7 files here that are highly sensitive, again, with credit card details, just in the finance department. And if we take one of these here, we're able to preview the content because I've told the system to store the content index so that I can come in and validate my findings. But this is something you can turn on or off, just to be clear on. But the big thing on the right side here is how risky the data is and the findings that it gathered on that file. Now, we know it got highly sensitive as a way to label. And if we expand here, we also know that it got financial data, credit card details, because of the way we filtered into this file. But we can see that there are other weighted labels associated to this content based on different tags and reporting groups that were classified against this file, ultimately based on the grammars and patterns that were identified on this file. So if we expand out, for instance, phone numbers, we can see the phone number that was associated to it and hit highlight it. Again, this data here can also not be stored within the repository, and we can just simply identify that we found a phone number. So I'm really more curious about the credit card number on this, and this just gives me a quick and easy way to be able to validate my findings. And we can scroll through these and ultimately see all the other files and validate that they found their credit card number on the file as well. So my next objective here really is to identify who has access to this content. So one way would be for me to then send this to a workspace. I have exactly those files that I need to go and report on who has access to them. So I can send them to a workspace where I can then kick off an action. This is a bit of a manual approach, right? I had to go into the dashboard. I had to go find the files that fit those criteria, that had that tag within that department. The alternative to me coming in and doing it this way is for me to build a workspace that automatically gathers data that's been identified with credit card details within only certain file shares. So that brings us back to now our main dashboard. We've moved from analyze, where we know what we found, to manage, where we now want to start taking action on this data. So if we hop into manage, we have various different ways to take actions on data, and we like to group them by workspaces. Workspaces really kind of deem the types of activities I'm going to be performing on data. If I'm doing data cleanup, where I'm just looking at the metadata to identify redundant, obsolete, and trivial data, I want to create workspaces solely focused around that. And then I can assign what kinds of actions can happen out of that. Maybe I only want delete and move as actions that can happen out of it. And I can define who can access those workspaces. I can have other workspaces for data subject access requests, where I want to find everything to do with a certain subject, an individual, and report on it. And maybe one of those actions that can come out of that is to be able to generate mass renditions as PDFs that I can then give to different audiences, ensuring that the data inside of it is properly masked and controlled. But in my case, this is really around a data governance approach workspace, where I'm trying to, again, find risky data that I want to now further understand who has access to it. So we have different workspaces that we can establish for different departments or different activities. In my case, it's this workspace for this department, the SkyTap environment. And inside of here, this workspace is now governed to only those 2 file shares. Really, I could have just had it on the finance department, but in my task, I was kind of curious to see what else across my file share has sensitive data. But again, I'm trying to create a workspace that's going to restrict the data that's associated based on the data sets I've established here. The next part of it, though, is to say, find me only the content that has PCI data within those departments or within those file shares. And that gets us to workbooks. So this is where I can build that rule that automatically gathers sensitive data pertaining to a certain set of criteria so that I can create an action. Remember, we found 7 files, right, when we were looking at the finance department that had credit card details. Notice here we have 7 files on this workbook. How this got established was because I have a query defined that's saying, find me anything that has a tag of credit card details that's within the data set finance SkyTap. So if we were to scan that data set again and new data came in that had credit card details, they would also get populated into this workbook. And if we click on the workbook, we can see those same 7 files that we had from earlier. Ultimately, though, my objective is to, one, get the data into a workbook so I have a consolidated view, but it's really to perform some type of action against that data. So like we said, we could have actions that move data to a proper place. Maybe instead of me reporting permissions, which I know is my main objective, maybe I want to actually move this content to a different location. And in this case, I could actually send the data to another file share, a SharePoint, or OpenText content management, where it can get secured and locked down with rights and retention and access controls, things like that. It could be that I want to send masked, or like we talked about before, useful in DSAR and other types of activities where I want to generate a rendition of the document as PDF and mask the sensitive values within it. I could call on protect that does an assignment of a purview sensitivity label to these files using Microsoft's purview capabilities. If I was doing data cleanup, or maybe these files shouldn't have belonged here, I can call in a delete function, and that will go and obviously delete the files from this source location with appropriate approvals, with the right kind of audit associated to it. But in my case, I really want to understand who has access to these files. So if I click on this action report permissions, this will kick off a call for the file reporter solution to be able to retrieve these files and their risky information, their sensitive data information, and merge it into a single view, which is where I'm going to hand it to Doug to demonstrate that part of it.
Thank you very much, Patrick. So as you can see on my screen here, here's the file action that Patrick was just kicking off in CDDRI. And here's the workbook, finance. We have all departments, and we also have one for human resources along with the workspace. So once we, through this integration with File Reporter, we're able to collect that information, I can then move over to view a particular report around this. So I'm going to go into full screen here. And as you can see here, we have the documents by classification and tag, highly sensitive, and the tags. We also have the permissions by trustee and assignment type. So I can look at direct group, direct users, and group membership, as well as trustee by classification and permission. So I'm going to focus in on just finance. So up here under the workbook, I'm going to select just the finance workbook here. And now I'm going to drill in and say, okay, I want to see everything that's highly sensitive that has a tag of credit card. So credit card details. But you can see the different permissions. You know, there's a department, information security and compliance, and internal audit, and then the actual group that providing that permission to the invoices folder where this particular file resides. Now, I can go in and say, okay, there's a direct user. So I want to click on this right here and filter that down. And now I can see that, well, here's a Lila Johnson is a member of information technologies, an IT engineer that has full control access to the finance data. So I could also, well, I wonder if anybody else within that department. So I'll go in and filter down a little bit more on the information technology department and determine that Lila is the only one that has that particular access. Now, since we are looking at this, we may be, since we're concerned about Lila, I might want to know everything that Lila has access to. So I'm going to reset, and I'm going to switch back over here now to the identity and select Lila Johnson here. Okay, and in looking at Lila, we can see not only does Lila have access to the finance information, but also access to sensitive files within human resources and also within the information security location here. And then I could further drill down into that to look for just for highly sensitive data, etc. Now, I'm going to switch back into the data classification. We're going to go back. Let's focus just on finance. So once we are able to identify the access to the finance data, and and determine that, well, here's maybe a group or a set of users that shouldn't have access, the next thing we want to do is put a protection policy in place with File Dynamics to protect this folder location. Now, we're not only protecting the finance folder, but all subfolders, and we're looking at the share level access as well, so that we can put a comprehensive protection policy in place that will monitor these folder locations and even remediate access if needed. So I'm going to switch now over to File Dynamics. And this is my finance data security and protection policy. So you can see it's finance is the folder that's being protected here. I have 2 email recipients that will be notified of any changes, Brent Winters and Andrew Aston. And we're monitoring for changes to share permissions, ownership, which can affect access at the folder level, group membership, if someone gets added or removed, inherited ACEs down below the target path, down below finance folder, and directly assigned. And I've assigned some data owners here. Now, Brent Winters is the finance manager who will be notified of these changes. The other really important thing here is the rule set. I have set up the information security and audit and compliance is allowed to have access to this data within finance, and obviously the finance department, and several other administrative roles that need access for managing that area in the location. And once we determine this, what we'll do is we're going to enforce the permissions. And notice Lila is not in here, as well as any other users. So it's not going to allow any users other than the ones within this to have access. And then we can schedule this. I don't have it scheduled in my demo. I don't want it to kick off and actually run, but you could schedule this to basically monitor even down to the hour. So I'm going to cancel out of this and switch out, and we'll just take a look at this department area. Under the departments, here's the finance folder, and here's the SF folder that we looked at earlier, where we determined that Lila has access. So we want to remediate that. Lila also had access down to the in the invoices area here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back and just manually kick off and execute the security scan. So what's going to happen, it's going to kick off this scan, okay, and then you will see it getting kicked off here. So it's pending right now. And then it's going to notify Brent Winters. I don't have email integration set up, but it would send an email to Brent that there was a change, and then Brent Winters will be able to log into the data owner web interface. It's delegated now, and it's complete. So if I go back and just take a look at this folder now, we've enforced this policy so that Lila no longer has access to the invoices folder, and also we've remediated access. So we're only enforcing the rule set that's applied in the policy for governing this data here and managing the access. Now, once the email is sent, Brent would be able to log in. I'm logged in as Brent Winters here, and go into notifications. Here, since she's assigned to this policy, the policy will show up over here in the right column. It'll show the different events that have occurred. And I'm going to go into view the file system events. And we'll be able to see the actual change that just occurred. The permissions right here for Lael Johnson, where that permission was allowed, and then it was removed. Okay, and it would be the same thing for the invoices folder as well. And somewhere along the way, there was a permission change at the actual finance folder itself as well, as I was working through the demo. So any changes that have occurred that affected the access will show up in this audit report. So I've gone through and actually shown the components here for the identifying who has access to the sensitive data and how they're gaining that access. We can also go in and audit a single user of concern across all the departments. I went in and we put a policy in place to protect that and actually correct and notify the data owner and essentially auto certify access to the finance folder and all subfolders. Now, next thing we're going to do is I'm going to turn it over to Richard, and he's going to go in and expand on this through so a line of business manager will be able to go in and do an attestation of finance data.
Thank you, Doug. My portion of this demonstration is going to focus on OpenText identity governance, and more specifically, compliance and attestation. Now, compliance and attestation is something that is done by line of business owners, and in this case, we have Brent Winters, who is a director who has many supervisors reporting under him. So if we look at this review tab, we can see that there's a finance review that's kicked off. However, for him, he has no specific items in queue. He does, however, have 268 different review items that are listed under his employees. So if we open the Review by Supervisor tab, we can see that there's a number of employees that work for him that have reviews they must complete. So we're going to focus on Chelsea Hurley. Let's switch tabs now and look at this from the point of view of Chelsea Hurley. Chelsea Hurley can see that she's got a finance review for Americas that is kicked off for her as well. And if we open this up, she's got 46 different items to look at. The main view is a little messy, so we have multiple options that can be chosen by the reviewer. And what we'll do is group this by application, which makes it a little neater for Chelsea to take a look at. You'll notice here we've got File System Permissions Analysis, and underneath here, uniquely for OpenText, we've got a view of unstructured data permissions that are assigned to users in the same view panel as you can see other permissions for those users. And we've also made it very simple so that you've got read permissions, write permissions, or change permissions instead of all the different permission tabs you normally see when looking at this from the point of view of Microsoft. This makes it easier for a line of business owner to understand things. But let's take a look at this from another viewpoint again and switch it to authorization status. Authorization status means that we're looking to see permissions that were assigned either through a business role or that were given to a user, however, not authorized by a business role. A business role is something that is defined that can contain technical roles inside of it and permissions for applications, groups, and other access of resources required for each employee to do their job. These resources and technical roles are aligned based on the title of the user, or they can be aligned as well by title and division. There are a number of ways to set this up, but what's important to know is that when a business role is being set up, one of the first things we do is role mining, which in our case can be done through artificial intelligence. And this role mining comes up with a template of permissions or other like-minded things with the user's identity, such as their location and title and so on. That can then be drafted by somebody who understands the role they're trying to define. That drafted role gets sent to an approver. The approver can either accept the role as it's created, or they can recommend certain changes and reject it. Those changes could be applied, and then the approval process starts again. And once there's a quorum, the role gets published. All this to say that the business role is vetted out quite thoroughly, and once it's assigned to a user, the reviewer can be very comfortable in knowing that the role itself has only the permissions that are desired for their employee. So Chelsea is going to take a look at the not authorized by business role because that would be intuitively where she would first focus her attention. So in here we can see that she's got one employee, Aaron Poshtaki, that has 3 permissions that are not assigned by business role. So if we take a look at what that is, we can see there's no authorization. It's a cash drawer access application, and the other 2 permissions are tied into it. It's a low risk permission. However, it's something that was not assigned to Aaron via a business role. So what she's going to do is she's going to click on those three permissions, and she's going to go ahead and say that she wants the permissions to be kept. However, she wants a comment to be addressed within this. So she's going to go ahead and say that she wants a role created for those permissions, so that there'll be a technical role that will assign this to Aaron in the future. So she goes ahead and puts that note. She says keep, and then she could submit those three items. Now she still has one permission that's left in here, and this one's a little puzzling. It's a change permission for one of her employees, Eden Cumming. If we look at this, it's not assigned by business role, and if we look at the weight of the permission for risk score here, it's a high risk score of 70. So she knows that Eden has been a long-time employee. However, this is the first time she does a review and see this permission assigned to her. So she's going to go ahead and have this reviewed by her manager, because she's not certain as to why this permission was given to Eden. So she'll go to the Action tab here. Well, let's close this to make it a little cleaner. She'll go to the Action tab, and she will say Change Reviewer, and she's going to change the reviewer to Brent. And she'll leave him a note so he understands why he should be looking at this. So she goes ahead and says Change Reviewer. Now that that's done, she has no more review items that are not authorized by a business role. So now what's left are all of the permissions that have been assigned via a business role. That means that this part of the review cycle will be much simpler. So she can go ahead and take one of her employees, and again, she can start with Aaron if she wishes, and just quickly take a look and see what's going on with Aaron. So she can see that this permission, of course, was authorized by a business role. We can see that the business role in question is AMS Finance, Accounting, and Revenue. If she wanted to, she can take a look at some of the more details around Aaron's employment with her, see his risk score, and again look at some of the permissions or other things that are granted to Aaron. But she's comfortable knowing that everything on this tab has been assigned by a business role that was fully vetted out. So what she'll do is just close these tabs and go to the top here and select all of the review items, and she's going to say keep with comments, and she'll add a comment that these permissions were all assigned via the business role AMS Finance, Accounting, and Revenue. So she'll say keep. Now that those items have been assigned the value for keep, she can submit those remaining items. And in a matter of moments, all of the review items assigned to Chelsea have been completed. Okay, so let's go back and take a look at Brent Winters and finish the reassigned task to take care of Eden Cummings. So when we go to Brent Winters this time, you'll notice, however, that there's two reviews that have been assigned to Brent Winters. When we first were there was only one. A new one has showed up called micro-certification DAG change permissions for finance. So what is this? If we take a look at the email system here, we can see that Brent, along with a couple of compliance auditors, have received an email that says that there was a task assigned to them to do a micro-certification. A micro-certification is something that, again, is unique to the OpenText identity governance solution. And what that is a data policy that can look at events or circumstances that are happening within the identity space and kick off a micro-certification, which is an out-of-band review. In this case here, we have one that's called DAG change permissions for an identity alert. And what this does is it looks for changes to permissions that were assigned to the Unstructured file system. So in this case, we saw a change permission that was assigned to Eden Cummings, and it kicked off a micro-certification. That micro-certification is something that happens because that policy was initiated. And what this means is that regardless of the fact that Chelsea spotted that there was an anomaly with one of her users, in the case of Brent Winters, he was notified out of band, which means not at a typical review cycle, that there's something for him to do. So he can go ahead and click on complete the task, and what this will do is bring us to this review of items for change permissions that were assigned to that folder in finance. Now when he looks at this, he also can see the Eden Cummings permission, the same one that Chelsea wanted him to look at, but he sees these other permissions for either system administrators or service accounts. So the first thing he does is he's going to take a look at all of those different permissions, and he will go ahead and say keep, because he knows that these permissions are ones that were assigned for the authorized system users. And he also will take a look now at this change permission, the same one Chelsea was concerned with. And yes, he realizes that this is not authorized by business role, and it's something that Eden should never typically have. So he's going to go ahead and he's also going to reassign this to a new reviewer, and he's going to assign it to one of the compliance officers, Adam Mandari. So we'll go ahead and find Adam, and we'll leave Adam some instructions. And he's going to go ahead and change that reviewer so it's no longer under his purview. So let's go and take a look at how things would look from the point of view of Adam Mandari. So we'll sign out of here and we'll go in as Adam. Now Adam is a compliance officer. He's the person that's most qualified to review and see what's going on, and he can of course see that review of one item was reassigned to him. So he takes a look at that, and again it doesn't take him long to realize what the concern is, because this change permission should never have gone to Eden Cummings. So the first thing he's going to do is take a look at Eden from a different viewpoint. He'll go and find her within the identity catalog itself. So he takes a search for her last name, and what's the first thing he notices is there's two Cummings here, Eden Cummings and Even Cummings. One of them is supposed to be a systems administrator, and the other is of course Eden Cummings, who has these permissions that were assigned. And in this case we can see that there's this sysadmin domain group that she was assigned to, and that's how she managed to get a permission, even though inside of data access governance we should have been able to remove permissions for users that aren't qualified. In this case, the system thinks she's qualified because she was part of the domain admin group. So to complete what he's doing, he'll go back to identities, he'll take a look at Evan Cummings, and sure enough, Evan Cummings was the person who should have had that permission assigned. So he can quickly ascertain that what must have happened is that somebody started typing in E. Cummings, and they didn't wait to see that it was the current or the appropriate Evan Cummings as opposed to Eden Cummings. So to complete this task, he'll go back to the review, he'll click open, look at that review item, and all he will do is complete the cycle by removing that permission and getting it reassigned to Evan. So we can see here how the identity governance, attestation, and compliance can complete the 360-degree review of all users within the identity system. Thank you very much.